So today we're going to be shaking up one of the biggest nutrition narratives out there, and that's cholesterol. Because when you dig into the data, and there's a lot of data, you start to see a much more complex story, and it may make you question all of those, low cholesterol and low fat mantras that we've been hearing since the 80s, and ultimately asking, could having a little bit more cholesterol actually be good for certain patients? I'm Dr. Carr. I'm here to help you make smarter choices to live a healthier life. And today I'm going to show you how sometimes the science, it really gets simplified into, a very simple black and white cholesterol is evil when the real picture may be a whole lot grayer. Before we dive into the latest research, let's talk about how cholesterol ended up in the doghouse. It all started in the mid 20th century. Scientists saw that people who ate a lot more saturated fat had higher blood cholesterol, and higher blood cholesterol was correlated with more heart disease. So the conclusion was that saturated fat raises cholesterol, cholesterol causes heart disease, and that must be the whole story. And there was a study called the 7-country study. And so the research suggested that there was a clear link between dietary fat, serum cholesterol, and heart disease. And so soon major organizations were issuing guidelines: slash your saturated fat, slash your cholesterol, and then watch your heart disease risk go down. And so that's why we ended up with decades of low fat everything: milk, crackers, cheese, everything, you name it. But guess what? As so often happens, what we realized is that the story was really incomplete. And ironically, Americans have actually gotten heavier since the time when they started reducing their overall fat intake or intake of saturated fat, because we replaced that fat with more refined carbs and sugar. And so really the question is, was this the best trade-off? Now, don't get me wrong, the old data, it wasn't fake, but it was simplified a lot. It was basically saying that high cholesterol is bad for everyone, and that's it, period. And to be fair, for many people, especially if you're 45 and you're sedentary and your cholesterol is sky high, you probably do want to bring that number down. But is that always the case? Let's keep going. All right, now here's something that blew my mind. So there's something called the Sardinian blue zone. And if you're into longevity research, you may have heard of the world's blue zones. There was a Netflix documentary that came out in the last couple of years. And it's places like Okinawa in Japan, or Ikaria in Greece, Nicoya in Costa Rica, and Loma Linda in California, and yes, Sardinia in Italy. And what they found there is that people, routinely live to 90 or 100 plus, often with minimal chronic disease. So get this, there was a 2025 study of just 168 older Sardinians, all over 90 years old. And again, this is just recently released. And what they found is that those with higher LDL cholesterol actually lived longer than their peers with lower LDL. And so basically, it's a complete 180 from the standard cholesterol narrative. And in fact, those with LDLs above 130 milligrams per deciliter survived about a year longer on average than those who are below 130. Now, what gets even weirder is that non-HDL cholesterol. So we typically think of that as the bad fraction or bad cholesterol, which I don't really love that term, but we'll use that for the time being. It was also correlated. What they found is that the non-HDL cholesterol was also correlated with better survival. Now, granted, this study was just observational, but the authors tried to address the usual caveat: could these low cholesterol folks just really, maybe they're the sick ones, and they tried controlling for diseases, and they excluded participants with major health conditions, and they still found this so-called cholesterol paradox, for the oldest old. And so that suggests that in a population that's survived at least to 90, a higher cholesterol may actually be less harmful and maybe even helpful. And so we're not sure, but it's definitely intriguing if you're someone who cares about longevity. Now, it doesn't mean that everyone should just say, cholesterol is always good, and I'm going to start going on, engorging on cheeseburgers, right? We have to be nuanced. But a 50-year-old, let's say, with really strong family history of coronary artery disease is going to be in a totally different scenario than a 95-year-old who's never had any kind of coronary event in their life. So again, really the context is what matters. And here's another one. So in the 60s and 70s, there was a large, well-controlled study done, and it was called the Minnesota Coronary Experiment, or MCE. Basically, they took thousands of patients in mental institutions and nursing homes and divided them into two groups. So one was a group that ate a diet high in saturated fat, And the other, they replace much of that saturated fat with corn oil, which is basically, rich in linoleic acid, which is an omega-6 polyunsaturated fat. And so based upon, the official story, you would predict that, well, obviously the corn oil group's cholesterol levels should go down significantly, which it did. And based upon that, then you would also expect that they would have fewer heart attacks and lower mortality. But in reality, once they published the full results, for some reason, decades later, what they found is that while the vegetable oil group did lower their cholesterol significantly, they didn't end up living any longer than the saturated fat group. And actually, there was a slight trend towards increased mortality in the group with the biggest cholesterol drops. So the question is why? Possibly, it could be that these extremely high levels or high intake of the omega-6 fats could lead to more oxidized LDL or something else that potentially, negates the positive benefits of low cholesterol. It's also possible that in these older institutionalized patients, driving cholesterol down aggressively doesn't help if there's other risk factors, things like smoking or inactivity or other illnesses that are present. And so really there's a big debate going on, in terms of how do we interpret the data. But I definitely think it at least, now you have to ask the question is just just lowering cholesterol in any old way yield all the heart benefits that we assume it does. Now let's pivot for a moment to statins. So these meds drastically reduce the liver's production of cholesterol, which ultimately lowers LDL, by a significant margin. And statins have been proven lifesavers for many middle-aged folks who are at high risk for heart disease. So again, the analogy I like to use, it's kind of like having an airbag in your car, for a high risk collision or high speed collision, having an airbag there is definitely going to keep you safer. But in older, low risk individuals, the picture is a lot murkier. And so when you've got, cardiologists and, the Heart Association coming out and saying that basically everyone over a certain age could potentially need a statin, or anyone with a level above a certain, LDL above a certain level needs one. Really, the benefit may not outweigh the risk. And so if you're 85 and you have no real significant heart disease history, it's basically like having an airbag in a fender bender. And, again, let's be crystal clear. If you have significant risk factors like serious family history or diabetes or established heart disease, statins can absolutely, be a huge lifesaver for you. But if you're 92-year-old grandma who's never had a heart issue, do they need, statins as part of their cholesterol lowering approach? Especially in light of this research now that suggests that higher cholesterol could be more beneficial. I think it's a lot harder to make that case. Now, let's not forget what cholesterol does for us, because it's not just a bad guy. Cholesterol is literally essential for life. First, it's the building block of all your cell membranes. Additionally, it helps to produce vitamin D, cortisol, testosterone, estrogen, and these are all vital hormones. The brain alone actually holds about 20 to 25% of your body's cholesterol. Your neurons, they need the cholesterol to help to insulate the cells and help to maintain, the communication within your brain. Plus, there is some research that's linking LDL particles may have the ability to bind and neutralize toxins. And so things like, bacterial endotoxins. And this really gives your immune system a bit of a helping hand. So in older adults, especially those who are 85 and up, extremely low cholesterol can actually correlate with frailty and a higher risk of infections. And this could be reverse causation, illness is causing the low cholesterol, or maybe the body does need some cholesterol as a nutritional reserve. Probably both factors are at play. So framing cholesterol as pure evil is like saying water is bad because you can drown in it. Context is everything. So does this suddenly mean that you can start loading up on dietary cholesterol? Not so fast. There's a big difference between dietary cholesterol, the things you get from eating like, high cholesterol foods like egg yolks and shellfish, and blood cholesterol, the stuff that's measured by your doctor. Most people's bodies produce about 80% of their cholesterol internally, so only about 20% or so comes directly from food. For many people, dietary cholesterol doesn't drastically change blood levels. That's why in 2015, the US guidelines actually dropped the strict upper limit on dietary cholesterol, because the direct link between an egg at breakfast and your total cholesterol number is not super strong for most individuals. However, saturated fat intake can definitely boost LDL. So if you're eating huge amounts of butter, cheese, and fatty meats day in and day out, this could elevate your serum LDL. The question is that automatically catastrophic for you? Or does it depend on your genetics, your exercise habits, your overall diet quality? We're learning it's the latter. It's not a single cookie cutter approach. Some folks do well on a low carb, high fat pattern if their metabolism is good. Others do better with, more grains and a moderate amount of lean protein. Either way, it's important to remember, we need to keep the nuance and because it's never as simple as, one nutrient to rule them all. So what are some key longevity takeaways? First, context is king. So if you're a middle-aged adult with major risk factors, maybe you're diabetic, or you've got a strong family history, or you've had a heart attack, lowering LDL is probably super important. Statins or other interventions can absolutely save lives in that scenario. Basically, it's like wearing seatbelts and having an airbag when you're on the highway. Now, second, late life cholesterol isn't always harmful. For those who make it to 85 or 90 with no significant signs of heart disease, there's intriguing evidence that a moderate to high cholesterol may not be so dangerous, and it can actually correlate with fewer infections and better resilience. And so we still need more research, but if you're in your 90s and your LDL creeps up a bit, it may not be a big deal. Third, really, quality over quantity when it comes to fats. So you shouldn't fear all fats. Polyunsaturated fats, especially omega-3s from fish, nuts, seeds, they can be super beneficial. But you want to make sure you're going to watch out for more of the junk fats. And trans fats are basically a ticket to inflammation, so you really want to avoid them. Fourth, dietary cholesterol versus blood cholesterol. So eating cholesterol-rich foods, things like eggs, they may not, skyrocket your LDL if your body self-regulates well. You want to focus on whole, nutrient-dense foods. If eggs fit your macros and they keep you feeling good, no need to freak out about, 300 milligrams in the yolk unless you personally respond with high blood lipids. Everyone's a bit different. And lastly, your doctor is still your friend in this case. Never just toss your prescription or ignore your numbers because you watched a YouTube video. Always make changes in consultation with a trusted healthcare provider who knows your full medical history. But don't be afraid to ask questions or explore new research. We want informed patients, not passive ones. So is cholesterol the big bad wolf? Not necessarily. It depends on your age, your overall risk, your lifestyle, genetic factors. We absolutely don't want extremely high LDL in our 40s and 50s, but we also shouldn't panic if someone in their 90s has a reading of 150 milligrams or more, especially if they're robust and healthy. The main point is that medicine's one-size-fit-all approach, lower is always better, can overlook individual nuance. And we've seen some surprising data from Sardinia and from big controlled studies like the Minnesota coronary experiment that really tell us that cholesterol's role is not so black and white. So again, I hope this helped to shed some light on a otherwise controversial subject. I'm Dr. Carr. I'm here to help you make smarter choices to live a healthier life. If you found this video helpful, go ahead and hit like and subscribe and make sure to share it with anyone else you think could find it helpful. Thank you.